CSA series. Tonight, myself and Clara Totten, are presenting on publishing with the Costume Society of America series at Kent State University Press. So Clara is the interim director and acquisitions editor of Kent State University Press. She has been in university press publishing for over a decade, having previously been an acquisitions editor at Georgetown University Press. Very impressive. Clara is active in the Association of University Presses, having served on its digital publishing committee and intellectual property and copyright committee. Clara enjoys working with authors at all stages of their careers, which I can attest to, and finds particular joy in demystifying publishing and helping first-time authors navigate the publication process. I am Kelly Reddy-Best, and I am a moral professor in apparel merchandising and design at Iowa State University, and I'm also the chief curator and director of ISU's Textiles and Clothing Museum. In my research, I examine the interrelationships of dress, identity, consumption, regulation, and the fashion system. And I currently serve as the CSA series editor for Kent State University Press. I've been a member of CSA for about 18 years, and I guest edited the inaugural special issue of Dress, and I served on the CSA board in addition to other numerous leadership roles. And I will now pass it to Clara.
Thank you, Kelly. So, as Kelly mentioned, the Kent State University Press is the publisher for the CSA series, the book series. And we've been the publisher since 2017. So you can see there the 4 books that have been published with us since then, although we have quite a number of books in various stages of development. And I will also make a plug for the books that were part of the series before the series came to us. So there are many amazing titles in the series before 2017. And if you go to the CSA bookstore, you can find all of those there.
So today I'm going to begin with talking about what do we publish. So as a series, we publish the history and future of fashion, dress, costume, appearance, and adornment. So broadly talking about dress and the body. We also publish about both historical research, current issues, because of course, yesterday is history. We also publish on curatorial topics, contemporary and design and construction practices, and also conservation techniques. So a broad spectrum of different kinds of topics that we will publish on, have published or would publish on in the future. We also publish works that are largely scholarly focused, or they could also be a little bit broader and more cater to general interest populations. The text can also be primarily textual, but they can also be highly illustrated. We have some really wonderful books that have really great imagery in them, full color, and the layouts are quite beautiful in my perspective. So why publish with CSA series at the Kent State University Press? There are a lot of presses out in the world, and many of them do publish fashion-related topics. But to give you a sense of like why you might choose CSA, we identified first we're a university press, and so of course other presses that are non-university presses are certainly wonderful and rigorous as well. Like for example, Bloomsbury Intellect, also really great presses. But we are a university press, and we are a nonprofit press. We also have a very rigorous anonymous peer review process, which is important for many scholars and to enhance the rigor of the scholarship itself. We also have a faculty editorial board who reviews and is engaged in the approval process. So in addition to myself and Clara, we also have a really wonderful group of folks on that board who provides another perspective on the potential publication. This is a really wonderful part of the press, and why I would in particular say that this is a really great place to publish with or submit your proposals to, is that there's that individual attention, and it can come from both either myself and or Clara, and in my experience, it's from both of us. And that support can really come based upon the author's need. Scholars who might be in the very early stages of their career, they might need a little bit more attention, or also maybe not. And then some more seasoned scholars may need less support, or they also might want more support. So I don't want to generalize based upon where that person is in their career, but there is the opportunity to have heightened attention from both the editor role, which I'm serving in, and also from Clara. And there is also this really great collaboration between CSA and the Kent State University Press. And we have a series board that is associated with the press through CSA. So they're also involved largely in the review process and other, advisory roles as needed. But they also serve to help enhance the press, enhance the rigor, help answer questions as needed. And another great thing is that CSA provides opportunities for modest grants to fund illustration costs. So that opportunity is available, which isn't, it can be available in other presses, but isn't always typical. So when do you contact the press? So you can contact the press at any stage. You can contact either myself or Clara at any stage in your writing process. So a few examples could be, if you have an initial idea, if you're brainstorming and you just want to discuss potential projects, or even if you have beyond a potential project in a paragraph scribble form and you have an outline, that also works great too. We know that people work in different ways, and both of these stages would be perfectly fine to reach out to us and we would help talk you through what might work or not work with the press. You could also reach out at the proposal stage before you submit or right after you submit, if you wanted to talk about proposal development strategies, or if you had questions about your particular proposal, we'd be happy to answer those as well. And then you can also message us after the proposal submission. So you can ask timeline inquiries. Those are really common. Logistical questions. Those are also really common questions as well. And so we're pretty transparent about that entire process. If an author has a question about the timeline, and we could very easily say we're waiting on a reviewer, or we're waiting, this is the part that we are waiting for, and we're still very committed to your proposal. We are just waiting throughout different parts of the process. And next, I'll pass it to Clara.
So as Kelly mentioned, we welcome proposals at any stage of a project's development, whether you have just an idea for a project or you have a full manuscript written, and everywhere in between. So as far as what goes into a proposal, we have standard proposal guidelines that are available on our website. What you see on the screen here is a copy of what is on the website. So our goal for this really is that we want our expectations for proposals and the information that we're looking for in a proposal to be completely clear to potential authors. We don't want to ding someone because they didn't realize they had to include something in a proposal. So I won't go through all of this because it's there and because I would encourage you to check out the website. But in general, every piece of information that we're looking for in a proposal is information that we really do use, both to evaluate the project, evaluate its suitability for the series, and to get a better sense of how you, the author, see it being positioned in the field. What kind of impact do you see it making? So for example, I'll just highlight a couple things on here that I get the most questions about, and I would encourage everyone to, no matter where you end up submitting a project proposal, if you see guidelines and you have questions about it, you should absolutely ask your editor. You should always be fully informed. So just a couple things to highlight here. One thing that we ask for is a list of comparable or competing titles and explanations of how your project is similar to and distinct from each of those. And sometimes authors will be a little apprehensive to put comparable titles on there, but what it helps us do is it helps us to see how you envision your book fitting in within the literature in the field. It gives us a sense of who do you see your audience as. If you see it as specialists, that will be very different from general readers, and do your comparable titles reflect that? So don't be afraid to put those in there. Likewise, we ask for suggested readers. So these are people who could potentially be peer reviewers. I will say sometimes we use some of these suggestions, sometimes we don't. It is not a given that we will. But again, it helps us to see who do you see that has the knowledge set, maybe specializes in the subfield that could really evaluate your project in a thorough way. Likewise, I'll add too, it's actually not on these proposals guidelines, but I'll just mention it. We also are respectful of the fact that sometimes there may be someone who you really don't want us to send the project to. Let's say you have real methodological differences with this person and you just know that they would reject your entire project on that basis. Well, it's okay to tell us that. The goal of peer review is to actually really be a helpful, constructive process. We want someone who will give your project a fair shake, who will provide constructive feedback, and who will help your book to be the strongest and most successful work that it can be. So that's really the spirit with which we pursue peer review. And then the rest of this is fairly straightforward. We do request that before we can send a project out for peer review, we do need to have at least 2 to 3 chapters, simply because we found that it can be really difficult for reviewers to give a thorough review if they don't have some of the manuscript to go on. Now, that being said, we completely encourage you to get in touch even if you haven't written anything yet, because one of the benefits of starting to work with us before you've even begun writing is that we can help you with that. We can give you guidance, we can give you feedback. I've had authors sometimes send me just the outline, an annotated table of contents, and we talk about, well, is this structure working? So we can't send it out for peer review until we have those sample chapters, but you should absolutely begin the conversation with us whenever you are ready to. So that's a bit on proposal submission. So what happens after you have submitted a proposal to us? So this, as this slide says, the steps are listed in a linear fashion, but the processes sometimes occur in slightly different orders in coordination with one another. So first, we will internally review your proposal. If we can see that there are areas that we'd like you to revise, we will let you know that before it ever goes out for review, because it is in all of our best interests if we can send out the strongest possible version of your proposal. So first, we'll undertake that internal review. And then we will determine whether we feel the project, let's say you have sample chapters, whether the project is ready for, if we have enough to send out for peer review, or if we feel like we need to see more of the manuscript before we can do that. And again, the goal is to have a helpful peer review process. That's really it. And so if we have a full manuscript, and we'll talk with you at that point about if there are any revisions we would recommend. If we determine that either the proposal and sample chapters or the full manuscript are ready for peer review, we'll send it out. And that's where it's what's called a partially closed review process, which means that the reviewers will know your identity, but you will not know their identity. And so it'll go out for that. When the reviews come back, we will share them with you. We'll talk about them. We'll look at them together and really see, did the reviewer understand the project? Did they understand its scope? Most of the time, the reviews really are very helpful. And we would much rather address potential shortcomings before a book goes to publication than after. So we'll share those with you. And then if it's been a full manuscript that's gone out for review and we determine, yes, the reviews are supportive, we'd like to publish this, that's when we would present it to the press's faculty editorial board. As Kelly mentioned, the editorial board it's a standard part of a university press, and we do need board approval for all of the books that we publish. But they are honestly a fantastic group, and they come from all over the university, and they love looking at projects that have nothing to do with what they normally research. So we're really, really fortunate, and they're a very bright, engaging group of people. So usually by the time we're taking a book to the board, we feel really confident in it. So we don't take them things that we don't think would pass. And then the final decision to publish, as it says here, is based on multiple factors. So peer review is a critical part of that. Input from Kelly, from me, from our editorial board, and then finally from cost estimates too. And the cost factor, that's a conversation we would be having throughout. So we don't want you to get all the way up to the very end and then suddenly we say, oh no, we can't do this. Instead, we might say, okay, well, your book has 150 color illustrations. Let's talk about that from the very beginning. So all of these conversations are kind of happening in tandem with one another. And so then finally, as it says here, generally a contract is offered upon approval of the faculty editorial board, but it may, when appropriate, be offered in an earlier stage. So we actually do have flexibility there, and we do work with authors. So for example, sometimes an author will say, well, it would be great if I had a contract because that can count toward my tenure portfolio by this date. And so then we might say, okay, we really do see this book coming to fruition. We see this going well. And so we may have flexibility there. So anytime an author has particular timelines in mind, particular deadlines, it's really helpful to us to know them because we can't help you if we don't know about them. So that's the proposal submission process in a nutshell, but after we finish our presentation here, if anyone has questions, we are, of course, happy to answer them.
And listed here are our editorial board members, specifically those that are on the CSA side. So just to clarify, there's two editorial boards. There's the faculty editorial board that Clara was talking about, that is through Kent State University, which is typical of university presses. And they're really looking at giving the stamp of approval. Our editorial board, they may serve as for example, reviewers. We might ask them questions. For example, we might ask them to help suggest reviewers depending upon their area of expertise, or just other advisory needs that we may have. So we have a really broad range of really fantastic folks. Darnell Jamal Lisby, who's at the Cleveland Museum of Art, who's an assistant curator. We also have faculty, Jean Parsons, who has since retired, but a very long-standing CSA member who has published significantly. Also, Casey Stannard, who is at Louisiana State University, again, who's a faculty member. And all of these folks have expertise in a variety of different areas that could help as we're working with authors who are seeking to publish or have published in areas that might be out of, for example, my expertise area. And so we really lean on these folks because we want to make sure that when we're going through the review process that we have knowledge expertise that can provide excellent feedback to the author. And so where do you send inquiries if you're interested in submitting? You can submit to anyone here. So you can submit to myself, Kelly, or you can submit to Clara. And so our emails are there, and our emails are also on the website. And I would say that we're pretty responsive responsive to folks who send inquiries again, at any stage in the process, which I mentioned before, initial ideas into logistics of where's my proposal now? Those kinds of questions are all valid and very much understood by us, particularly folks who might be going through any kind of review process, or it might be important for them to know where their work stands in regards to the peer review and or um, contract and or publication status. We very much understand the need to know that information.
I've received conflicting information about whether or not it's appropriate to submit a book proposal to more than one press at a time. I would appreciate your best practices recommendations. This is a great question. And you will receive conflicting information, honestly, because there is no one set answer, and folks there are differing schools of thought on it. So I can give you mine, but this is not the gospel truth. It is just one person's opinion. So personally, I think that it's fine too, honestly. It happens a lot. And what I will say is that I consider it very helpful if an author is submitting something to multiple places for them to let me know that. And the reason for that is that it can be helpful if, let's say, especially if they can give me any kind of sense of timeline or of how far along it is with another press, then it lets me say, oh, this one is on a shorter timeline, so let me see if I can find a reviewer who can review this manuscript in 5 weeks instead of 7 or something like that. And it kind of helps to evaluate, okay, are we really the right fit? Because if someone has a contract in hand that they're weighing from another press, I may be able to tell them right there, well, I can't offer you a contract, so I'm happy to send your manuscript out for review, but be aware it may be 6 weeks before I can give you an answer. But if I don't know that it's under evaluation elsewhere, then that's a lot harder. So that's kind of my take on it. I totally recognize why folks would want to submit it in multiple places, especially because peer review processes are not necessarily fast. I do understand that. But I would just say, if you do submit it to multiple places, then if you can let the editor know, that actually can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Clara. And I would add to it's very different. The idea of submitting to multiple presses is very different from a journal article. So, for example, if you're going to submit a journal article, a peer-reviewed manuscript to a peer-reviewed journal, then you only submit to one. And sometimes that can get confusing for folks. Not that this was part of, Carol, your question, but I just wanted to clarify for any folks who might be like emerging scholars and just starting out publishing. In those cases, they almost always say that you have to confirm that you haven't submitted it elsewhere, that it can only be under review for in one journal at a time, which is different from the press and the proposal for a book manuscript. So, could you discuss ebooks versus hard copies for publishing? Clara, do you want to take this one?
So our standard practice is to publish simultaneously hard copies and ebooks. So we want both to be available. The only time this doesn't happen, and this is something we would work with you on during development, is every now and again, someone will really, really need to include an image that we don't have electronic rights for. And if there is an image in a book where the author has not secured electronic rights, then that entire book cannot be an ebook. So it's a really great reason to make sure that you get electronic rights for your images. But generally speaking, we make both available. And it's just a standard expectation these days for the most part, that if you can get a book in hard copy, you can get it in an ebook. I will say that for years, people talked about, oh, the print book is dying, but that has not happened. And in fact, the majority of book sales worldwide are still print books. So print books are still very, very prevalent, but it is really important to us that we're able to offer it in whatever kind of format readers would expect it to be available.
I know in some cases we don't publish textbooks, but I think in being in the academic higher education conversations, that it's definitely going in that direction for textbooks. But we're really looking at the scholarly or general interest books, and those other presses that certainly do publish in our area. I'm thinking, Bloomsbury and Intellect. They're definitely doing many textbooks, and I think going the route of making them digital only. But yeah, that's all I had to add on that one. Do you ever do audiobook in addition to hard copy, ebook, or other forms? That's a really great question.
Question. Sometimes we do. So we we have a contract with an audiobook producer and distributor that works with a lot of university presses in particular. And so we essentially pitch our books to them. And then it's up to them to decide whether they want to do an audiobook of something. So basically they get right of first refusal. And so some of our books they do end up picking up and they record them, they distribute them. But if an author also comes to us and says, say, I really want to do an audiobook and here's where I think I could pitch it, or, I have this connection to someone who'd be able to produce it, we're totally flexible about that as well.
So what is the feasibility of including textile swatches in a hard copy book? Clara.
Talking actual textile swatches or images of textile swatches? Yes, actual textile swatches. So that's a really interesting question. Honestly, and having not encountered this situation before, this is my guess. The tricky part would probably be scaling that up for entire print runs of a book because you would have to custom glue in however many textile swatches you're doing for every book. So I don't know, Kelly, if you've had experience with this or if this is something that is more commonly done. I haven't done it myself before, but that is just my guess.
I personally have glued in textile swatches into small books for exhibition purposes, but which is definitely, as Claire, as you're saying, it's definitely a lot of work. But that could be really a really cool, unique idea. I don't, I haven't, I've seen it in exhibition catalogs, excuse me, which again, Claire and I have talked about this, and please, Claire, correct me if I'm wrong. We steer away from catalog. Okay, yes, correct. We steer away from exhibition catalogs, excuse me. And so I've seen it in that area. I don't know. I think that would be where you'd reach out to Clara and pitch your idea and ask, and then that's where
Right.
like cost and those kinds of things come into play, right?
Yeah. And just
Yeah,
because we haven't
yeah.
done something doesn't mean it can't be done. We just don't know, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And because our discipline is so tactile and so it's about the materials. I mean, I would always ask, like, if you have a really interesting, innovative idea like that, I would just ask, because I think in some ways that could essentially like help sell the book and make it really interesting. But again, it's just the limitations of production, and that'd be like I'd be like, yeah, let's do it, but I don't control the cost. I'm not. Clara's really looking at, can we do this? How do we do it? Like those kinds of
It's a
questions.
conversation to have. Yeah, absolutely a
Yeah, yeah.
conversation to have.
Which I think is really um, awesome about the press is that hearing as I work with Clara and like thinking through these kinds of things, it's always like, well, let's just talk about it. And I'm like, okay, great, cool. I love that. So, do you have a goal of how many books you'd like to publish every year? Clara, that's you.
Sure. So we have flexibility here, depending on the projects we get and the development for them. Offhand, I'd say it's most likely that at the moment we're doing maybe we aim for 2 to 3 a year. But if let's say it really picks up, we're not going to limit it and say, well, I'm sorry, we've already published our 3, so we're not going to do this. That's not really, we don't want to unnecessarily hold someone's book if it's ready to go. So there is flexibility there. But the nice thing is that if we have that kind of balanced lower number, it means that every book gets more attention. And we really do want every book to reach its full potential. So that helps. Yeah.
How many pages on average do you usually print per hard copy book? This is again a Clara question.
So this varies widely depending on the book. We do not have a set number of pages within which authors must work because none of our books are templated. They are all custom designed. And so we want your manuscript to be the length that it needs to be to make the argument or tell the story that you are seeking to tell. I will say in general, and this is not specific to the CSA series, this is a broad statement. Typically, books are a minimum of roughly 50,000 words or so, just because when you get much below that, you're starting to look more at a pamphlet than a full book. And then on the upper end, if your manuscript is over about 120,000 words, then we'll probably ask you to trim some of it. And that's simply because once we get past that 120,000 word mark, the production costs start to go up more. We have to price the book higher to meet those costs. And we really want to try to keep books affordable for individual purchasers so that it's not only libraries with their shrinking budgets that could afford to buy a book. So we would talk with you about that, though. There's no exactly set number there.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because many folks always think about it in word count, not pages, because you can shrink and font size. There's all kinds of ways to alter the number of pages, but word count is going to stay the same, no matter how big or small the font is. Do we have a pitch season? To my knowledge, we do not have a pitch season. People can pitch anytime. And that goes back to the when to contact us. It's on a rolling basis. And I always attend, almost always attend the CSA's National Symposium, and I'll be at the one coming up. And or all other conferences as well. I'm typically at many of the fashion conferences that might have a history or culture track with them, and I'm happy to meet authors at those and discuss. But there's no particular time period where this is the only time period we would accept discussing a proposal. It's on a rolling basis, which I think is really nice in many ways, especially for folks who might be on particular deadlines or who have some specific requirements for their promotion in whatever institution they are operating within.
I was just going to say the approach that Kelly and I take to this is that we really want publication to be a collaborative process. We really want it to be one where you, the author, feel like you can always come to us with questions. No one is born knowing how to publish a book. So we want you to come to us with questions. We want you to tell us if you don't understand something. We want you to know that things will be a conversation. We won't just send you the peer reviews and say, see ya. we want to actually talk about things. We want to say either here's what's working or here's what's not working, and really just have there be open lines of communication so that you, the author, also feel fully informed throughout the publication process.
What is your average press run for a book?
And I'll give kind of a little lesson on how print runs work in publishing these days. So the standard in academic publishing now is to do a relatively small, what's called initial print run. And that could be something as small as just a few hundred copies. And then, and that's simply because warehouse space is at a premium, basically. And printing now can happen fast enough that publishers in general prefer to have smaller initial print runs and then print more as they need to. So the minimum run, if we were doing something like that, it might be a minimum run of 300. But that's not to say at all that that's all we expect the book to sell. It's just an initial run. And then what we'll also do, depending on the book, and so this would get into, we need to look at the book and say, okay, is it heavily illustrated or is it primarily text? Are the illustrations in color or in black and white? So there are all these different factors, but if a book is a suitable candidate for what's called print on demand, we put it into print on demand. And years ago, you could tell a print on demand book because it did not look very good and the quality was not good. So now, though, print on demand is standard, and the quality is very, very high. And so that's another thing we'll sometimes do if a book is a good candidate for print on demand, is we might do a small initial print run, move the book into print on demand, and then that way, anytime someone orders the book, it just automatically gets printed. So we don't have to worry about it ever running out of stock. So the print run question, they're fairly small print runs, but it's no reflection of how we expect a book to perform. It's really just a calculation of inventory space and print on demand suitability. In that case, what would make a book a good candidate for print on demand? So generally books that are not heavily color illustrated. That's which in fashion, some of them, for example, we have the one book by Kendra Van Cleve about autumn and fashion. That book, it is beautiful. It is heavily illustrated. It is not a good candidate for print on demand because we would never want to sacrifice quality for that. But yeah, generally something that's heavier in text, has fewer illustrations, so isn't a coffee table book. If it has illustrations, if they're in black and white, that can make it easier. So we'll always keep a book in stock. We won't say, well, it can't be in print on demand, therefore it just runs out. We would reprint it if needed.
So do you use a style guide? Do we have a limit on the number of photographs and illustrations in your books?
So style guide, we use the Chicago Manual of Style. That is our house style guide. And as for a limit on the number of photographs and illustrations in your books, that there is not a strict limit. We will say we do have an expectation that the illustrations, the photographs in your book add to your book. So we want you to present your argument in the way that is most effective. If that means heavily illustrated, that means heavily illustrated. We recognize that within this field, that can be critical. But what we don't want are kind of photographs and illustrations that are purely decorative, that really have no purpose in actually bolstering your argument. So that's just something we would look at on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and I think too, the one thing I can think in regards to photos is sometimes making sure also that the photos are high quality enough can also be a determining factor. Even if it's like really wonderful, like, it's proving the point, but it's just, it won't look good. That's where I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Clara, but that we might come back and say, well, this is a really great image, but the quality is too low to do a print. to put it in print. So that might be also a determining factor. I think I
That's
personally had that
absolutely
experience.
true.
I was like, we need this image, and they were like, no, it's
Yeah,
pixelated.
because
I
you
was
don't
like,
want it to look, yeah, you don't want it to look bad when it prints. And the other thing I would throw into is that permissions are a lot of work. So if authors are using a lot of images, I always encourage them start that permissions process as early as you possibly can, because you will likely need permission for most, if not all, of the images that you are using. It is the author's responsibility to secure those permissions, although if you have questions about it, if you need help with it, if you're not sure what kind of language to use to ask for permission, we can definitely help with that.
yeah, well, one other thing I'll add too, like for permissions, if anyone is associated with a university, there will be a university librarian who might be just dedicated to helping with that. And there's so many people in all different institutions in so many different roles, but there's typically a librarian who will know exactly what to do, know exactly how to support you. In addition to the press can definitely answer some of those questions, but that can be really essential to help move that process along because it can take a really long time to obtain those permissions. And you're like asking for permission, you don't know if the book will be published yet, but you're like telling the person, so it's like this limbo that the author is sometimes in. Um, and and I think that that's definitely recognized, but worth it because then the book will look really great with the wonderful images. Do you have preferred formats for photos or tables?
Yeah, so we do. For photographs, we love it when we get high resolution TIFF files. We know that that's not always possible though. So we've had images that have come as JPEGs. Those are also usually work pretty well if they're high resolution enough. And then I will say often PNG files do not work as well. They do not print quite as well. And I will also say that one thing I see happen sometimes is that authors will kind of manually bump up the resolution of a JPEG, and you can definitely tell when that has happened. There's some distortion there. And then for charts and for tables, that usually if we get those either in Word documents are fine, or if we get PDFs, those are also fine. So there is flexibility there. So the nice thing is the 4 books that Kent State Press has published so far are each of them are really different, and so they're kind of each a good sample of the kind of book we might publish. So, for example, Kendra Van Cleve's book about autumn and fashion that is highly illustrated. On the other end, all of them are illustrated to varying degrees. On the other end, Red, White, and Blue on the Runway is more of a trade book. It's written for a more general audience. It's just a really great read. And then Kelly, your book for conservation specialists, a little bit more of a kind of a manual feel to it. And then Tamika Ellington's book, hers is Black Hair in a White World. Hers is an edited collection. So actually, the 4 that we've done are each a sample in their own right for different kinds of book projects.
Yeah, and I think that they definitely showcase the the breadth of like the kinds of books that if you have a proposal idea, that we would consider.
Totally.
And I think and I think too, like not a lot, sometimes folks aren't necessarily thinking about volumes, edited books, but Tamika's is an excellent example of an edited book with a variety of different authors using different perspectives and things like that. So yeah, different 4 great examples. Well, mine's one.
It's a great
So
example.
I'll just say that the other three are really great examples. I won't compliment myself too much. Any last concluding remark? Any last comments from Clara that you think and things that we might have missed that uh, would be important to know for potential authors who've now planted the seed of potentially publishing a book?
I don't think so. I think really the biggest thing is just to know that you can ask us questions. We recognize that, and this goes within publishing, there is this history in academic publishing of it sometimes being exclusive or being kind of this gatekeeping thing. Historically, it used to be that there was the norm that you couldn't just email an editor because you had to have an introduction. Okay, well, who's going to introduce you? What if you don't have a mentor or a senior scholar who would introduce you? And so I still get that sometimes that folks aren't even sure if they can just send an email or say, I don't know if I'm ready for a book yet, but I'd love to just learn more about the publication process. Even that is fine. So I would just say Kelly and I both are we want to be very approachable. And we really want authors very genuinely to feel like it is a positive publication experience. We just want it to be good. So don't hesitate to reach out to either of us.
Yeah, and I think one last that that reminded me too of sometimes too during the revision process, if you submit and then, it's moving forward and there's a question about a review or comment, that is also okay to ask questions about. I just did that myself today. I was working on another paper and I thought to myself, gosh, I was like, yes, I can email the editor. Like, if all she's going to do is tell me no, like, I can't answer that. But she didn't, she answered it. She said, I just wasn't sure what the reviewer meant because there's lots of interpretations that the comment could be thought through with. And I just emailed, got an answer, and then I moved forward with my revision. So we really want to take that approach where if there is uncertainty that you could just ask, and we'll be very direct and say the answer. We most likely won't say we can't answer that. We will, or just figure it out yourself. We will most likely look through that. The other thing too is I'm mindful too of sometimes reviewer comments are like can be unhelpful, and so I'm really mindful of that, and thinking through like what we might send back to the author or just not send back to, if something is really unhelpful, it's not necessary to send it um, to the author, um, and um, thinking through that, and no fault. I always say no fault to the reviewer. People are really busy and sometimes they're just trying to get the review done, or there's a lot of different reasons why those comments might come. Maybe they had that experience and that's the norm for them, but I think that Clara can confirm that we want to break that cycle of not sending authors unhelpful, um, uh, non-constructive comments. We really want to send very constructive comments, and just remove the things that are unhelpful and can be hurtful at times. That it's just not necessary. It's not needed in publication processes, and I feel personally committed to that. So
Same. We do not want peer review to be a process that tears people down, just like on a basic human level.
right.
We really don't. And we also, like, to your point about not knowing what the peer reviewer meant, if that happens, you can ask us and we can actually go back to the peer reviewer and ask them to clarify.
And
And
ask.
most of the time,
Yes,
because
right.
they want it to be helpful too, most of the time they're happy to do that. So
Hmm.
we want it to be useful and we want our authors to feel like it's a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think that I think that there can be really rigorous peer review, really constructive comments that can help enhance that the author maybe hasn't thought about, or even that I didn't think about. It's like, oh, that's a good point, reviewer one, reviewer two. Like, oh, I didn't think about that. But just making sure it's framed in a way that's constructive and not putting the person down in ways that are unhelpful and unnecessary in the publishing world. So thank you everyone for joining our session, and we hope that you submit and or inquire with us about potentially publishing with the CSA series through Kent State University Press. Thank you everybody.